Hey folks, my name is Mo Amir and this is VANCOLOUR, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show. Tonight, we're going to explore different gender gaps, starting with pay equity. Did you know that BC is tied with Alberta for having the worst gender pay gap in the entire country? In fact, women in our province make, on average, 20% less than men. Here to explain how we got here and what can be done is a Vancouver-based lawyer representing West Coast Leaf, BC's first and only organization dedicated to using the law to work towards an equal and just society for all women and people who experience gender-based discrimination. She is Humera Jabir. Humera, pleasure to see you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks so much for having us.
So sitting here in progressive Vancouver, I think a lot of British Columbians would be quite surprised to learn that we have the worst gender pay gap in the entire country. So how do we explain this? Why are women in BC paid so much less than men in BC?
It's really astonishing, isn't it, that we're so far down the line from having these conversations. You know, the BC government has been talking about this issue, the NDP government, since 2001, and other jurisdictions have been addressing the pay gap for decades. So to find that we're here and that we still have the worst pay gap, and it's not only women, it's also people who are marginalized because of their gender, trans, non-binary, and other people who are marginalized because of their gender. And we know the pay gap is much worse for people who are racialized, for Indigenous women, for newcomers.
So is it a matter of, you know, this gender pay gap existing and other jurisdictions maybe working towards it, whereas BC maybe hasn't? Like, I'm just trying to understand why we're so further behind than other provinces.
That's exactly it. You know, of course, the gender pay gap is present in every place, in every jurisdiction. But what we have seen is that other jurisdictions have taken on a much more proactive approach to addressing this issue. And it's taken BC all these decades to get to this point where this year we are having a Pay Transparency Act that's being implemented and proposed. And that's just a small step towards addressing this major issue and not exactly what we want to see in terms of the effective steps that are needed.
So what can a provincial government possibly do? You said this new legislation, but it's not exactly pay equity legislation, right? So
No,
what can be done and what does it do?
Yes, so we have been in a coalition of, you may have seen our open letter, of over 125 organizations and individuals who have called on the BC government to enact pay equity legislation. And the difference between pay equity legislation and the pay transparency legislation the BC government has proposed is accountability. That's the key difference.
Okay.
Yes. So, you know, the pay transparency legislation that they have proposed will roll out over the next many years. You know, it'll take several years to be implemented and to actually impact employers, but it has no teeth. There's no requirements on employers to actually report, to take steps to address discrimination. So then what's the point?
Why would they do? Why wouldn't they add something with a little more teeth?
That's exactly what we want to see. We want to see BC work towards that. And at least for now, we seem to have a commitment that at some point in the future, BC might have pay equity legislation. But it is concerning because other jurisdictions have had legislation that addresses the pay gap for quite some time. And we know what could work to actually address this issue. And we want BC to be the progressive province it can be and be innovative as well and make sure that legislation takes an intersectional approach. So it's not just looking at gender in terms of women, but looking at other social identities and intersecting identities.
Are there any jurisdictions that you can look at and go, yeah, you know, they're doing it right, that this is a good model to follow?
Well, seeing as we're at the bottom, I think that that's an example of how, you know, proactive steps can make a difference.
So basically anyone else.
You know, and other jurisdictions, you know, they implemented, you know, legislation or took steps decades ago. So that's also outmoded at this time. So we really want to see BC be an innovator and really tackle this issue in a way that is proactive and intersectional.
Right. Now, when we think about solutions, are they structural with regard to, you know, making sure that everyone has equal access to education or perhaps housing or things like that? Or is it something where we have to look at industry and focus in on specific companies and make sure that they are compensating employees in an equitable way?
No doubt there are systemic aspects to this, and certainly at West Coast Leaf, we talk about a feminist economic framework, and that includes many different aspects of our society, from childcare to equitable employment practices to education, etc. So there are many different aspects of the economy and society that are impacting why women are ending up, and people who are marginalized who are in their gender are being paid in a less equal way.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is really unconscious biases and structural factors within employers and employment situations. So that's what this legislation can
Do you have an example of that?
Certainly. So what we want to look at is how can an employer look at their organization and really assess how people are being paid who are doing work that requires similar skill levels, a similar level of responsibility, workload, expertise, and really assess when you look at the substantive work that individuals are doing in your organization, are they being paid equally or not?
Mm-hmm. Why is this a provincial issue as opposed to a federal issue? Like, wouldn't the federal government of Canada want to take on the role of making sure that the economy is equitable and paying people their fair wage?
Well, the federal government has legislation, and that applies to federal employment.
Okay.
So federally regulated organizations and even the federal government itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really within the purview of the provincial government.
Okay.
That when it comes to employers across British Columbia, that they have the ability to require employment protections, to require that there be certain types of reporting and ensure that there's proactive steps taken to address discrimination. And certainly we see that in the Employment Standards Act, and there are some good aspects of the legislation that were recently introduced with respect to being upfront about what salaries are being offered in job ads,
mm-hmm.
ensuring that people cannot be retaliated against for asking about pay. So this is within the provincial scope.
Fascinating. Well, Humera, you've shone a big light on this issue. And again, I was quite surprised when I read about BC's gender pay gap in relation to other provinces and territories. So I appreciate your work on this. And thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Folks, representing West Coast Leaf, she is Humera Jabir. Now, after some business, Canadian men and women are at odds over who should run the government. In fact, if only men voted in the next federal election, Pierre Poilievre would be Canada's next prime minister in a landslide. But if only women voted, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau might be able to keep his job. Shachi Curl will join us to explain this gender gap up next.